All right, everybody, we are going to get started in a minute.
Please take the opportunity to log in via MeetEcho. It will give us a head count for who's here, and also we will be using that to run the queue.
Oops, I should do that too, I guess. Okay, so this is the PROCON working group. Leslie and I are the chairs, and you should, of course, note the note well. And we are here to follow the IETF processes and act professionally and in a friendly manner in all of our deliberations. You should sign on, as noted, if you're remote. I don't know if you have any remote ones, but if you're remote, then please keep your audio and video off unless you're speaking. And state your name when you're speaking on the mic. Some resources that you can browse if needed. And our agenda then. Some admin things. If there's any agenda pass, we would like to hear from you. Pete has agreed to take some notes. Thank you. And then the bulk of the meeting will be spent on our adopted working group documents. So that's the 2026 and 2418 BIS documents. Rich and David will talk about those. And then we've recently had, just a couple of days ago, an update on the IETF chair delegation document by Lars. And he's going to talk about that. And also we've had some discussion around should we extend the delegation beyond what's in the Lars document currently. We'll hear from several people on that topic. I don't see anybody queuing up for comments on the agenda, so we'll proceed. But first, Leslie, do you want to take us through the charter reminder?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure everyone reminds themselves about the scope of the work that we're doing in this working group and more importantly, what's out of scope for the work in the working group. And chiefly, we're focusing on merging all the documents which update 2026 and 2418 and any verified or hold for update errata. There are two other extensions that are part of our charter, namely the treatment of milestones in working group charters and guidelines for working group adoption of drafts. But beyond that, for the two main process documents, we would require a recharter to do more work than that. So we're going to be a little bit firm in today's discussions to make sure that anything that is identified as would require new process changes, we'll note it. But we will not be discussing it or acting on it in this meeting. And then there's the delegation of authorities by the IETF chair, which is the document that Jari mentioned Lars is working on. Anyway, this slide is a cut and paste from our charter, so feel free to reference it during the meeting if it's useful. And with that, I think we're ready to go to the 2026 BIS discussion. How do I unshare?
Good morning. All right, 2026 BIS, the Internet Standards Process, version 3. Internet Standards Process, version 3.1 or second edition. Okay, so what happened since the last meeting in Madrid? We got adopted. We moved it to the working group, the working group's GitHub organization, changed the name, posted a new draft. David fixed up the CI things so it all works. Bunch of editorial cleanup. For example, the document talked about had phrases like internet standards must be in ASCII. And so instead we pointed to the RFC style guide, another document for the output formats and what the default input formats are. So those are sort of not really editorial, but we moved them out of scope of I moved them out of scope of the document. Removed or unindented some text blocks. 2026, in the old ASCII style, when they wanted to emphasize something, would often have, it would indent like a block quote style format. And so, for example, there are things like some of those phrases like, not every RFC is an internet standard. And that was an indented block. No reason not to just move it out since we have fonts available now. Some others were removed, like the edit history that showed what all the other RFCs were and so on. So those are the editorial cleanup issues. A couple of semantic changes. Informational everything published on the IETF stream, and that includes informational and experimental documents, must meet the IPR requirements. If you want, if you need something else, we don't publish things that don't give the IETF change control in the IETF stream anymore. We have other streams in which you can do that. Also, there was an edit. One of the changes previously incorporated got rid of the draft status. Pete provided some wording to say, oh, we should figure out what to do with documents currently in the draft status, and so make them, the proposed solution is make the IESG responsible for either moving them forward or deleting it or just leaving things as they are. Interrupt with questions because this will be short. Okay, now go over the open issues. Editorial. Number 40, these are the numbers refer to issues in the GitHub repository. They're reverse order just because I went down the list and put them. 43 is random editorial nits. I mean, these are really random and really nits. They say things like RFC XXX should have a space after the RFC. I mean, it's at that level of thing. So unless you are, well, given this crowd probably are, unless you have severe OCD, you probably can ignore 43. Oh, by the way, we are planning, or I am planning, for every PR that I merge, I'll post it to the list first so people can see it. 41 mentions that working group chairs are responsible for maintaining a mailing list and the archives of that list. That's no longer done. So we mentioned that the LLC is responsible for doing that, providing that tooling. Number 39 is just currently an open item. The IETF Trust, as everybody knows, is being renamed and moved and so on. The current plan is come hell or high water, that will be done by March. This document will not, so that's going to remain open for a little bit. Maybe we'll have to say the IETF Intellectual Property Management Corporation, parentheses, formerly known as the Trust, or vice versa, depending on when publication happens. But those are the known editorial issues. Something you want to share with the crowd, Michael? Okay, there are some simple issues. Number 37, the discussion of internet drafts is outdated, doesn't fully reflect reality. No, don't have notes on that. The definition of a contribution, there's a lot of text and discussion about that. Instead, I propose that we just refer to 5378, which is also being revised, but there's a PR that does that. Pulls out a whole bunch of text and just says, you have to follow, the definition of a contribution is over here, and The things that you have to follow, the requirements for intellectual property are also defined over there. Number 26, should the process documents go into a new category? You know, not standard, but PROC or process or something. It was an idea Michael threw out. I don't know if anybody wants to make an argument in favor of it. Oh, sit down.
Yeah, just a personal opinion that this is seems like one of those new process things that we should not be doing too much. So, I mean, if there's no pressing reason or, you know, charter item that tells us to do this, then I think we should skip this. Personal opinion.
Yes from Lars. Yes, thumbs up from Paul.
I think it is out of charter. I just wanted also to make a comment that, I mean, the last time as a participant in this working group, that I think flagging these things and logging them is appropriate so that some future work will know what were all the bits that we elected not to take up in this working group because they were beyond our charter.
Okay, so we'll add a tag that says not planned or out of charter, out of scope or something like that. Number 37, it's got a lot of wording changes that have to happen, and so I will probably post draft text to the list before actually thinking of doing anything. You know, in the 20 years since that was written, things have changed. It talks about the Internet Drafts Directory. It talks about when drafts expire. Things are removed from that directory. It says, oh yeah, you can use a new feature like the World Wide Web to fetch things. It's showing its age.
Yeah, Rich. Maybe if you go back one,
Yeah.
The 37, I looked at all of these issues and sort of attempted to classify them as, you know, this is because of RFC such and such, this is because of errata, this is because of editorial considerations, or this is entirely new stuff, the new process. This one seems like not, or at least I could not think of the RFC that this relates to, but it's kind of like reality alignment. And I guess for each of these reality alignment cases, we need to look at that if that makes sense. I think this one does make sense because we do operate differently, but that is something that we should flag in some sense, or at least keep track of that we know that we've done these actual updates because of the other RFCs, and then there's also these, you know, these three other things or whatever the number is.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't want to speak over you. Lars, I got +1 to Jari, but I think these reality alignments things, do they need to be in a standards track document? Can we move them to something that's informational, and maybe, because all the things you mentioned, right, probably arguably shouldn't really have been part of 2026 to begin with, if we were to like structure this document now, and we are restructuring it now. So I kind of wonder if we can like put the core pieces that require to be, you know, the things that define in the standards track need to be in a standards track document, but other things that are sort of operational, you know, if we can point to something else that defines them, great, we're already doing that. But if this is not one of those where we have something to point at, maybe we create something new to point at that is in the standards track document.
Sure. So yeah, for example, the way I changed the definition of a contribution to point elsewhere. The problem is the Internet Draft section, you know, saying all we really need to say operationally is Internet drafts are revised, you know, if adopted, the working group is responsible for revising them and updating them, and at some point it progresses to the IESG. The issue, or an issue with that section, is it currently says in currently indented, highlighted text, Internet drafts must never be used in an RFP or quoted as anything other than a work in progress, and it describes how RFCs can refer to Internet drafts. That's a little bit of a crossing issue, as it were, category crossing issue. So I think we're going to need to discuss that on the list.
I would maybe argue, Lars again, that the principle should be what breaks if we don't say anything here.
Okay.
And nothing breaks if we don't, if we stop citing internet drafts as work in progress, as far as I can tell. And we don't control what people put in RFPs, sorry. And so that is also like, it was in the original document, but, it's not useful to say anymore, I think.
Okay.
So Lars, if I'm trying to rephrase a little bit what you said. So what you're saying is that we should make a change, and the change is to delete text, or it could reappear somewhere else. But
Right.
we, in this particular case, we don't need to talk about internet drafts expiry or
My
repositories
preferences
and
would
such.
be delete text if it can be deleted and nothing breaks. Point at something else that already exists instead of writing new text. If we need to write new text, see if it can be informative or informational, or and in the last categories, it needs to be in the standards part of the document.
And
Okay.
I think that's fine, at least from my perspective. But we should still keep track of this. That we did make a change. That was the deletion.
Yeah. No, I like the phrasing. What breaks if we delete it? And that's okay.
Harald Alderstrand on point 26. We tried to do an new class of documents some 20 years ago called IETF operational notes. The experiment failed. ISG decided to stop it. So I agree that this is out of scope for this group, and I think we got history showing that we have managed to not do it before. So don't touch it.
Yep.
Robert Sparks, I'm not sure if I followed what Harold is aiming at. I think that you're going to have to touch the places where we've got really out of alignment with reality statements that were captured in this document, and any replacement text should speak as little as possible about concrete realization of operational things, and speak only to the concepts of things like an archive that are required for the standards process, and leave the operational bits for somewhere else to be discussed.
There were a lot of people nodding, including me, as you said that. So yeah.
Elliot Lear. I'm sorry, I'm out of my.
No.
I am. I'm sorry. My fault.
David Skenazy, just strong +1 to this. First, I was proposing text on how to reduce this because it is completely obsolete. Even the mentions of the archive are just completely wrong. So I think let's just remove it and have, maybe this lives in an ISG statement. Maybe this lives on a, so just a data tracker. But let's not have to reopen this document every time we want to tweak a little something.
Okay.
Leslie Daigle, I have two comments. One is personal and one is chair, so I'm going to be lazy and sit here. Personal comment, I'm going to make the observation that internet drafts actually are not uniquely used by the IETF, right? I mean, any RFC starts as an internet draft. So I think that means that aligns well, I think, with what Robert was getting at, and saying that point to what you need, and don't try to define the internet drafts in the standards process. As chair, I'm going to observe that this is in part why we want to maybe note and move on from the things that are reality alignment challenges. I think we can note that there's we've gotten some good input in terms of guidelines on how to handle this sort of thing, but we should flag it as make sure that we've done it right and acknowledge that it's not just a simple editorial update, since we don't have things that we can clearly point at. Lars, I think you're next. You put yourself back in queue. You want out? All right. Elliot.
Okay. So I 100% agree with Robert. And this is we tell legislators this, right? Don't hard code to a particular technology. So, Rich, I think there are two levels of cleanup that I think we're talking about here in this particular section for internet drafts. The first is to get to the principles. And I would say don't change the principles. That's the second part of the cleanup. But the first part of the cleanup is just like there's obvious stuff that is going to be uncontroversial in terms of, you know, the fact that the technology has changed and all that stuff. The principle discussion is the one that should be noted, as Leslie was describing. And so I would split this into two in your head as you're going through it. And the rest of it, then we can argue over PR once we have a PR.
Thanks.
This is Barry Lieb. I'll highlight something that both Robert and David were getting at. That first, let's go with the Saint-Exupéry principle. Perfection is achieved not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to remove. Remove anything that is not conceptual and process related. Anything that's operational goes somewhere else. The second piece is that the somewhere else is that we used to only have RFCs, and we put things in informational RFCs or whatever. We have a lot of other places to put stuff now. So we have web pages that say how we do things, and we have a data tracker. Let's use them. And if there's a need to move some of this to somewhere else, that somewhere else may just be something easier to change than an RFC.
Okay, I think we have pretty strong consensus on what should be done for 37, so I know what to do. Okay, I ran out of adjectives for simple. Let's see, so I'll bottom up in this case. 42 and 43 are very related. 42 says that, you know, the RFC editor can, in consultation with the IESG, mark an RFC as best current practice or experimental or informational. I think now that that's all set by the ISG before it goes to the, you know, the RPC, and there's no longer an RFC editor. We have to change that name too. So that's just another simple, straightforward change reflecting reality. Section 623 talks about how, I forget the details. Did I take notes? No, not quite. But it talks about how it ignores the fact that there were now other, it was created before there were other streams and that they were codified so well, so that if you want an informational document, for example, it says an informational document such as might come from the IRTF research group. Well, the IRTF has its own publication stream now, so it will publish its documents. Only the IETF stream can publish standards track documents. So again, it's kind of a minor editorial change reflecting reality that fact streams now exist, whereas they didn't before, didn't at the time the stock was written.
This is Barry. Can you clarify what number 42 is? I'm not getting it from
Okay,
the,
so number 42 says the RFC editor, which position doesn't exist anymore, may, in consultation with the ISG, mark, before publishing, may mark an RFC to be as experimental or best current practice.
Okay. It's something else that I just want to remind people in this. It used to be that not all experimental and informational RFCs had IETF consensus in the past.
Right.
And they do now, and they have for probably 20 years. We've sent everything out for last call and gotten consensus. So anything in here that talks about the difference between something that we now call the IETF stream and something that we call consensus is now merged.
Yes.
So keep that in mind as you're editing.
Right. You co-authored that document.
I think so,
Yeah.
Hi, Roman Yunlu, just getting to the mic on 42. You're exactly right. Just on the et cetera, on set during the ISG review, that actually often is more set by the working group chairs. So the ISG certainly out of that review may change the status of that document, but that really flows through the fingers of the working group.
Yeah. Okay. I just didn't want to type informational yet again.
And just coming back to Barry's point, as you're going through that merge, just don't forget that the other streams exist.
Well, yeah. So we don't want to forget that the other streams exist, and maybe at some point it makes, or in some places in the document, it makes sense to say that other streams can publish documents, and that this is talking only about the IETF stream.
Okay.
Yeah, Kulevin, this reminds me of an issue or discussion we recently had, and maybe it's a good time to address this. And I can open a new issue if needed, but I want to ask you. We have this that the document says BCP documents are IETF documents. I don't think it use the word stream there, but we do publish IAB BCP documents that have IETF consensus on the IAB stream.
Okay. Yeah, I will not remember that. Please open an issue.
Okay. But I also don't know what the right answer is here. This is just where we are.
Yeah, no, or you can add a note to issue 42 if you want, whichever is easier.
So a reality alignment on that. There was a period of time, I believe, where we decided BCPs were absolutely IETF documents, and accused the IAB stream BCPs as being a historical artifact. I think it would be good for us to decide whether that's true or not, or whether it's okay. I suspect that the current reality is if the IAB tried to do a BCP under the IAB stream, there would be some yelping.
So the big example of a BCP in the IAB stream is security considerations. Wonderful document, and it really is a best current practice. I think the trick here is that we just have to recognize that the ones that exist, but I agree that going forward, like whether it's initiated by the IAB or whatever, right? We've had a couple of those corner cases. The fact is that any BCP requires the IETF consensus process to have completed and the IESG to approve. I think that's sort of the words that you're looking for.
Exactly. So it does say so. And the current process, and we're actually doing this right now because we also have the liaison management things. And I think those actually are owned by the IAB. So if we do a revision, then it should be the IAB responsibility to move these documents forward. And the process that's clear is we move it through the IAB and then we hand it over to the ISG. It gets AD sponsored, it gets IETF consensus, and then we can publish it as BCP. The thing that's not clear is on which stream. And like the 2026 kind of, I would rather interpret it to publish it on the IETF stream, but I don't think that's what we did in the past. And I'm also not sure if that's the right answer because again, at least these two documents, the liaison management, they are clearly owned by the IAB and should be in future as well. Yep. So.
Okay.
Do you think you might be able to, you or somebody on the IAB might be able to sort of put together a list of the documents that have been published that way? It might be helpful from the standpoint of having an inventory of what was done when and
I think you can easily click in the data tracker on IAB and then select BCP. There's a whole bunch of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like some of them might not even have a stream, right?
Think, I'm sort of thinking that somebody on the IAB might be able to say why it was done as an IAB document or not as an IAB document. And
I'm also not sure if all of these BCPs actually went through a proper IETF consensus process. I have no idea.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. And the liaison documents in particular are entirely the IAB's business. And now I think probably it helps to recognize why we use the BCP label in those cases. And if it's for internal IAB process, maybe it's not necessary for it to be a BCP, and that helps simplify our lives a little bit.
Yeah, that's kind of a little bit where I was going because it seems to me like your security considerations example, I mean, that's contributing to the IETF process. It shouldn't be just an IAB, it shouldn't be an IAB document. And that's a little bit why I was looking for that inventory.
Yeah, and I agree. So about the security considerations, I mean, sure, that probably should be an IETF document, but the IAB ones, I think, as I said, should be owned by the liaison one should be owned by the IAB. Yeah. And I think it's still useful to actually get IETF consensus on these documents. That's what I want at the end.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just doing a bit of a time check here. You got, I think, one more slide after this.
Yes.
Which is the hard one. So yeah, we'll probably want to.
Yep. Okay. Maybe this we can just move, number 44, we can just have discussion on the list. The 2026 mentions all capital, capital letters, internet standard multiple times. And I think sometimes it referring to documents on the standards track. The difference between proposed standard and internet standard is gotten fuzzier over time, and nobody really cares. Not too many people care all that much.
When 2026 was written, it wasn't called Internet Standard, it was called Standard. So the phrase Internet Standard meant something different from what it does today.
I see. Okay. All right. So maybe this will morph to mostly an editorial, a minor editorial issue. Okay. That's good information. Thank you, Barry. We'll discuss this one on the list because I want to do the next. Well, we have to do the next one. Oh, right. I have the clicker. The appeals process. Okay, no comment. Okay. So start at the number top. Many of the recent appeals raised an issue that they sent an appeal to the ADs and only one responded. I think to help avoid some of the round trips and discussion that happened, we need to make it clear that the ADs can delegate. And they can say, oh, I'm the responsible AD for this group, and Deb is not going to talk about TLS to you, Dr. Bernstein, to figure out, make it a hypothetical example. So it's almost an editorial issue, but I think it needs to be made explicit because by the reading of some people, it's not clear that the ADs are responsible. They mean collectively, not that the ADs collectively can decide individually who is responsible for handling the first appeal.
Paul Hoffman, you have divide/delegate. I think you just mean divide, not delegate. Delegate normally points down.
Okay, sure.
Well, I'm trying to make it so it's less
no, I
controversial.
understand. Yeah, fine. I will. Maybe assign is the better word.
Jarek, so when I was reading about this, I was wondering if you meant, is the problem that you're sort of saying that we're sending to all ADs and they all have to act, or that you're not saying which of the responsible areas, responsible ADs in this area we should send it to? Because we do have the situation that sometimes ADs don't share, clean cut, this is my working group, that's your working group, but I take one document from your working group because, you're conflicted with your affiliation or something like that.
Right. Yeah, so I think it's a mix. The examples I'm thinking of, the recent examples have all been both area director, the appealant expected both area directors in the area to handle their complaint. But some areas have only one AD, and therefore, and the complaint is about that AD interaction. It might be, assigned to a different AD, or a different AD may be picked.
But is the problem the expectation of the person who's appealing, or the
Yes.
text in the RFC?
It's the
Does the text
both.
does the text allow you to behave in the rational way, which is one AD deals with this?
Yeah, no, it's the behavior of the person appealing based on the text that says the ADs are the first level to handle an appeal.
I think I'm struggling to understand why we care what the person who is appealing thinks.
Well, because it has had multiple round trip interactions and slowed down the IETF's workflow.
It doesn't actually answer my question, but
Well,
I'll see the point.
This is Barry. I think we're going to have to see your proposed text
Okay.
to figure out what we think of it.
Sure. Okay.
Miria, you're in queue. Okay.
Okay. Also, the 2026 talks about public records, everything is available, and we have had many appeals recently that say, please conduct all your discussions on the IETF list, the TLS list, the SSHM list. we don't explicitly say anywhere that and not just appeals, but things like design groups and so on, some matters can be held privately, can be discussed privately. I don't know, is there any?
So my point on the discussion that's happened so far in the cases that we've dealt with is that this is a reality alignment thing, that it has never been the case back to before 2026 that that section meant the IASG could not have private discussions about certain topics, that the IAB cannot have private discussions about certain topics. And there's clearly nothing that prevents two working group members who are from, either the same company or different companies to go sit in a corner and talk about what they plan to bring to a working group. The reading of this so strictly to entail that somehow that's not true, I think is silly. If we want to deal with it as a reality alignment and change the text to soften it, that's fine. I don't know that it's strictly necessary. The old adage about bad cases make bad law. Let's not adjust text just because someone is interpreting them in a silly way.
The problem is that I don't think everybody agrees with you, Pete.
I know.
And you are?
I'm Elliot. And so I would say that, yeah, some alignment of the text is probably in order. Now, in several different dimensions, right? Because there's how we do our work, there's how appeals are handled. This has come across in several different ways. And my suggestion is to create a couple of sub-issues on this, because I think it has a salubrious effect of actually reacting, at least at an introspective level, to determine whether or not we should change the text. And if somebody can come up with a nice PR that actually does do a good job of reflecting reality without warping our standards process in ways that the community doesn't want it warped, all the better.
Lars, so I do agree mostly with Pete. I think it's somewhat ridiculous to read a requirement for public records as identical to a requirement to fully have all discussions in the open. I think that is just willfully misreading the text, right? And that said, maybe we can clarify it, and then we would need to see a proposal for that, and I would probably be okay with that. But I also if we change this text, I'm 100% sure that certain people will look at the change and say, aha, they're changing the rules now because they haven't been complying with what I claimed was the correct reading all along. So we got to deal with that when it happens, right?
Harald Alvestrom has a long enough memory to remember when ISG calls were not open to the public, because the principle adhered to at the time was discussions are private, decisions are public. I think that's the thing we should stick to, and stick hard. As in, if you have a discussion, it might be public, it might be private, your business. If you make a decision, you document it publicly and keep it at that.
Yeah, it could have been actually good that I'm after you, because I think what we need is a record. We need a record that a discussion has happened, and not like a detailed transcript of what was discussed. And that's also true for any kind of appeal discussion or whatever. You have to record that you had a discussion, and that's it. And that's kind of what the text is saying. And I think we can clarify it a little bit, because it's not super clear, but we shouldn't weekly and too much change it. Might be small tweaks here.
Okay, I think I have a good way to go based on what the last three speakers said. The public record is what counts, not necessarily the discussions that led to it. And that, okay. And yeah. Oh, and I'm done.
Yep.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Rich. David?
Hello. Hello. Oh, really? The mic here. Hello, everyone. I'm David Skenazy, and I'm here to talk about 2418 BIS, which is one of our foundational documents, the one about working groups and what they do. So I recently joined Rich as co-author on this one. Clicker. So for those of you who haven't seen previous episodes of this show or have been on multiple airplanes across continents since then, a very quick recap. Rich started this effort back in August, created the working group in July, then pretty quickly thereafter, shortly thereafter, adopted the document. And now we've added some things. And so the goal of this is to kind of incorporate the document, any updates that have been made to documents and minor changes to match reality within the confines of our charter, which we discussed earlier. So I'm going to go briefly through the changes that were made since then. Just your view of the adopted version is just a carbon copy of the individual draft, and then we made a few changes since then. One of them, there was an appendix with a sample charter that felt quaint, not particularly helpful. So especially in this day and age where you can find charters very easily on the data tracker, most folks didn't find it helpful, so it has been removed. Another one, there was a section in 2418 that described conflicts of interest, a topic that is better described in 2026 BIS, and then that's been updated. So instead of trying to recreate that, we just replaced it with a pointer. Again, goal of all of this cleanup, a lot of this cleanup is to have a single source of truth for things that are smaller that can be updated. So more pointers everywhere. Then, very minor change. The text that described the IAB liaison to the IESG was strangely worded and a little confusing. And so now it just says that there is a liaison as opposed to there is a second member, which could have been interpreted slightly differently. All right, this change is slightly bigger. So we discussed it. I had a small presentation in Madrid about it. And since then, we had a PR, we had a robust discussion on the PR on the list, and we eventually merged it. So quick summary of that. It's exactly the proposal that we discussed in Madrid. Milestones are now optional on a per working group basis at the discretion of the responsible area director. Kind of the thinking there is when you charter a new working group, pretty often you will use milestones and have very specific deliverables to get started. But on some long-lasting maintenance working groups, milestones are sometimes not useful anymore. So if the chairs aren't updating them and the AD agrees, they can just remove them. It makes it simpler. It also removes some of the very hard-coded text that was in 2418 about milestones needing to have dates, which is something that isn't a reality anymore. And so the text also says that the granularity of milestones can be adjusted. It's not prescriptive about it. And this is something that the ISG can decide in collaboration with the tools team who actually implements the changes, because this is where the milestones actually live. John.
I'm a little bit scared about this. In my capacity as a firm advocate for shutting down WGs who are not performing, as distinct from letting them drag on forever and turning into an excuse for the ISG needing to delegate things, not watch working groups, and a number of other things like that. So I recognize this slide and what you just said probably represents our current reality, but I think we should be a little bit careful about changing it without careful consideration of the implications.
That makes sense. So the good news here, and if I understand your point correctly, I mean, part of the goal of the milestones was to help the area director make sure that the working group was on track. And it's true, if the working group is really not getting their job done, it is that responsible ID's job to close the working group or other remedies. Luckily, in that case, since this is all under control of the responsible AD, in this case, they would keep the milestones, which is something that I'd recommend for new working groups. It's more for other working groups where they're going smoothly and the AD doesn't think there's value. So they remain that control, which I think should address your concern.
I think it does, but I want to make certain we don't accidentally disable the ability of members of the community to say to that responsible AD, this working group isn't going anywhere, please shut it down, and then appeal that decision if it's.
Yep, that makes sense. And I think hopefully community members will feel empowered to do that with or without milestones.
Okay, I just want to make certain that the text that evolves from this doesn't accidentally prevent things rather than simply clarifying. So we're probably on the same page.
Yep. Yeah. And feel free to look at the PR number 26 listed here for the full text. I think I really do think it addresses that. And but if it doesn't, please let us know, and we can work together on improving that text.
Good. Thank you.
Leslie Daigle, speaking as a working group member. If I recall correctly, in July, when we talked about this, there was also the thought of maybe, shuffling some of this, how to do it off to a wiki or an ISG managed page. And I think I don't know that needs to get captured in a document, but I do think that can help address some of the points that John is raising. Because I think having something that is a tangible expression of expectation of work progress is useful. To be discussed somewhere that isn't here. I think that there may be other ways than milestones. There may be other methodologies than strict timelines that should be explored in terms of useful ways of expressing that. So I think that's a piece of future work that should be done by somebody, not here.
I agree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. That could be, for example, an IESG statement on how to measure success of working groups. I said ISG once and Roman gets up. But yeah, I think that would be helpful to have, or in any format. It's good. It would be good guidance. Roman.
Hi, Roman Dinilio. I just wanted to comment a little bit of what John said about what might be consequences to make sure everyone kind of talks through this. It's not about shutting down the working groups. It's about spinning new ones up. I just want to make sure that this doesn't create more friction for AD balloting that they would feel like they would need to block because they don't feel like they have sufficient transparency, understanding kind of what that work is. So just managing that level of fidelity of detail on the front end.
That makes sense. And I think I expect that in the overwhelming majority of cases, new working groups would have milestones. And if the case where it doesn't, the responsible AD would talk to the rest of the ISG and explain why they think they would prefer it to be that way.
Why I might caution on that very natural kind of assumption you would think for new starts, given the number of blocks we now see, or even on initial review to say, you gave us a charter and 0 milestones. So very often we're pushing those into the process. So that assumption, we might want to consider how to enshrine that assumption into one venue.
Fair enough. It's been a while since I wrote the PR. I think it might have a should for new working groups, but it might not. So I'll double check.
Yeah, and this is sort of a corollary or complementary.
And you are?
I am Elliot still. A sort of corollary or complementary point to both what Roman said and to what you said, Leslie, and it also goes to the other document, which is one of the goals here, I think, is to consolidate information. And if we start spinning things off to other documents, that's not consolidation. So the one question that I would ask everybody in the working group to keep their eyes on, and I do this in my independent submissions editor role, is to always read this from the reader's point of view, where it's not, and you have to put aside all that IETF knowledge that you have. It's hard. Hand it to your brother, hand it to your mother, and say, can you understand what the process is of having read all this? Or do you feel like you have to read another 24 documents?
I'm going to leverage that and point out why I keep bugging you to state who you are on the mic. For anyone listening to the recording afterwards, they don't have the advantage of seeing the queue and they don't necessarily know who's speaking. So that's just why I keep bugging people to say who they are. Thank you, Elliot. John?
That would be a great feature for MeetEcho to add that
You
in
think?
the transcript.
First of all, strongly endorse what Leslie just said. And I agree with Elliot, but following that and the other comments, I just want to make certain that we don't take this down the road, down a road which is cliff at the end of it. The road which is called kick down the road, but the ISD is too busy to think about it. So either let's get the important principles in this document, or make a firm plan and set of commitments as to how and when those other documents are going to get done, rather than having this should be in some other document which we will somehow figure out how to do someday and somehow get around to.
And so just to be clear, those principles are still in that section that describes chartering of working groups. It goes into detail about this, and that has been left the same. It's really some of the musts have been loosened. So I think it's really still there. And if it isn't, I'd love to see what kind of text we can add.
Okay. In particular, one of the areas in which we've had problems that milestones might or might not be helpful about is a working group which is created under AD number 1. And time goes on, and the working group drags out, and it's now AD number 3. And AD number 3 discovers they can't do anything about the working group because they don't remember the conditions under which it was created, don't remember the individual discussions. Nobody's interested in the milestones either because they're not there, because they're long obsolete. And that results in the working group dragging on until AD number 4 takes it over. And at the time this stuff was written, and I think I've said this directly or indirectly on the list, the time this stuff was written, we had some exceptions, but the expectation was that working groups were going to be relatively short-lived. And a working group running into its 3rd or 4th AD was an extremely unusual situation. That's no longer the case, but those assumptions still linger, and we shouldn't go forward without somehow addressing them. Does that make any sense?
Thank you, John.
I've locked the queue for this particular topic just because there are 5 more issues. So FYI, Lars?
I'll be fast. Lars Eggert. So I again thought, like, what breaks if we remove this? And I think the answer is almost nothing. The one thing that I think it realistically changes is that missing milestones sometimes gives an AD some ammunition to shut down a working group. And that's it in my book. Right. So I don't think this needs to be part of the BIS document. I think it can go in a bucket that says the ISG is free to let working groups arrange the work in ways that is most productive for them, and working groups can do different things in my book too. Like, so I think this is not something that materially affects the standards process, and so put it somewhere else or delete it.
Thanks. And the final change in the PR as well is that it allows, with the AD approval, to flip a bit on the data tracker. That'll be a conversation with the tools team, such that chairs can update milestones without having to ask AD approval. So it makes a lot of these things simpler. All right, next. Now on to open issues where we don't have PRs yet, but wanted to discuss with this group. So one is, when we reviewed the charter earlier, one of the areas for improvement we discussed in revising this document was adoption calls. 418 doesn't reference them at all, and they are a very common part of our process today. We don't always do them, and that's fine. There are cases where we don't need them. I don't think anyone on this issue is proposing that we make adoption calls mandatory. The question is, as someone reads through this, the flow of the document is kind of the lifetime of working groups, of how they're chartered and have goals, and then documents, and then they're closed. Should we describe adoption as part of this document, or should we leave this topic not in there? Open to opinions. Barry.
This is Barry Lieba, not in there. If you say anything about it, you can say it's a common thing that's done. Go here to see what, how it works. But it's not it's a concept, but how it works is the process that should be documented elsewhere.
That makes sense. Paul?
What Barry said, plus it's extremely important to some people. As a working group chair, I have been harangued once or twice for, you're supposed to do a working group adoption call now and such. So a mention would be great, but with no specificity would be even better.
And you are?
I'm sorry, Paul Hoffman. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so what I'm hearing is we should write a PR that mentions this concept as something that is done without too much detail and definitely no prescription. Okay, Marianne?
My understanding was always that you don't need to adopt a document. The important part is at the end that you have consensus to publish a document. That's a part of the standards process that's important. Everything else is just like a convenient for everybody who's working here.
So not quite, if I may interrupt. 2418 has a notion of individual draft versus working group documents. So that concept is there, just the transition from one to the other is not given a name.
So, but it's still not a mandatory, so the concept is there, but it's not a mandatory part of
That's exactly
the
right.
standard
And
process.
similar to this, we're not mandating anything, we're just naming the concept.
And I very much think that if you adopt a document, you should run some kind of publicly documented adoption call for transparency purposes. I would really recommend that. Which still makes it not mandatory because you don't have to adopt a document.
Great, thank you. All right, I think that's everyone on this issue. Thanks. Rich, can I ask you to summarize the results of this in the issue before I forget as we keep going, or if the chairs would like to do that? Otherwise, I'll try to do it best I can at the end of the session. Oh, well, perfect. Thank you. All right. Then, open issue number 27, virtual BOFs. This one's a fun one. I know some people in the room have strong opinions. 2418 talks about BOFs. They're a formal concept in our process, and it has specific rules about them where you should often do 1, 2 is okay, but 3 is right out. And they mention BOFs specifically in terms of things that happen in an IETF plenary meeting, by which I mean one of our 3 times a year meeting, not the thing we have on Wednesday. But we have since recently had interim BOFs, specifically BOFs that happened between 2 plenary meetings, often all as a virtual meeting. And so those have worked. We've created working groups that way. And by the way, BOFs are not required. You can form a working group without a BOF. The kind of loophole this creates that no one thought of back in 2418, because our virtual tools weren't what they are now, is if you have one of those virtual BOFs, do they count to the 2 limit? And does this question matter is also probably worth asking. Barry.
This is Barry Lieba. The 1, 2, 3 thing was put in there to keep people from flailing around and constantly pounding to get the same thing done and failing. So that's the concept part. That should be here, that we have these things called BOFs. They may be physical, they may be virtual. You get a limited number of times or a limited time period to try to get your work accepted, whatever. The details go somewhere else. The exact numbers, how we approve them, and all that's somewhere else. But the concept should be here.
That makes sense. And on that note, which is not really about this issue, but I'm remembering it in case people have opinions because it's relevant. we have invented a concept of working group forming BOF versus non-working group forming BOFs that we talk about here. That is not defined any, well, I kind of agree that the latter means you're reviewing a charter and the former maybe not, but that is not defined here either. And if we were to define if there are kind of BOFs that count towards the limit and some that don't count, we should probably figure that out. All right, Miriam?
Yeah, Mia Kulun, that's what I came for to say, that this is missing. That's a discussion that's happening all the time, but I can also just agree that shouldn't be a difference between virtual and not virtual.
But I guess question to the room is, should we just have all of them count in that? Because at the end of the day, that's what we have as a limit.
The details go elsewhere.
The details go elsewhere. Got it. Got it.
Where?
Because if this is a hard limit in the process, it needs to be a normative something. Is why, like how to run them, we have a great informational document about that. But if there's a hard limit, the scope of that limit needs to be defined somewhere.
Yes.
Yes, so that is a hard limit in 2418.
Yeah. So I was around with Barry when
Speak closer to the mic,
sorry,
please,
this is
and
Elliot again.
remind us who you are,
Yeah,
Elliot.
this is Elliot again. Sorry. So I remember the issue here as well. I do think that there have been a couple times when that limit has actually been more of an impediment than anything else. Those were the exception, not the rule, to be fair. So the two things I would say is, number one, we should probably make sure that there's some shoulds in there to sort of make sure that the IESG has choices still on this. And the second is that we might note that BOFs are not the only way that work gets done these days. Probably informationally noting that work does tend to be dispatched. Now, obviously, you want this document to be timeless, so you don't want to necessarily nail in how the IESG organizes work and such. But maybe some informational note that this is not the only way that things that work gets standardized in the IETF.
That makes a lot.
Sorry. I'm just interjecting that, again, we're running up against time challenges here. So I'm being a little bit haphazard with the lock unlock on the queue, because I appreciate this is something that needs some actual discussion in order to get resolved. But I'm going to ask people to be focused and brief, because we're in danger of not having time to deal with the delegation document.
Romandini as an individual, I think we've had a transformational thing happen in the IETF where we've really enfranchised remote participants. So we need to continue that. And to me, the logical consequence of that is that there is a 2 BOF limit. That's the phrase BOF limit. It's about BOFs, not the nature of the BOF. So I think the interim BOFs will absolutely should count in that limit. There's no distinction in my view. My concern with the threat model is if interim BOFs are kind of out, you're running effectively a shadow working group that you can have an AD just run as many of these meetings they want. Pretty much can do even documents, as we just discussed, since there's no mandatory adoption call, really up to working group last calling it. That's how much you can get done in the process. And I think it very much helps with project management to focus the participants and proponents to have a hard limit, and we got to treat them as the same, in my opinion.
That makes sense. Thank you, Roman.
Yeah, Lars, I get almost the same point as Roman. I think we should again keep this pretty short and say, BOFs is how new work starts in the IETF. There's a number that you can have. Whether 2 is the right answer, I don't really care. And that's it basically, right? And not distinguish whether they're virtual or not, or a side meeting or working group forming or non-working group forming, because oftentimes one turns into the other during the BOF. And I've seen cases where the chairs were unprepared to have a charter ready and stuff like that. So I agree the limit helps. It mostly helps to curtail ADs. It helps ADs to curtail participants, but also the other way around. And so I think a limit is fine. I think we run into the 2 limit too often to maybe make that comfortable, but a small number would be good.
That makes sense, because the simplest solution to that is to kind of delete the text that says that BOFs happen at plenary meetings and just leave the limit.
Michael Richardson, not a former Gen 8 RD like everyone else in the room. So I'm for 2 BOF limit. I'm for keeping the limit. I think it really focuses people I'm happy if they're virtual. I think it enfranchises people. One of the effects of this is that people want to hit the BOF fully prepared and having fully dealt with reasonable objections, okay, ahead of time. And the thing that we ran into last year was we were told, no, we can't use Meet Echo for doing that because that would count as a BOF. And I think that's unfortunate because it is a really good tool, and that the ad hoc things that people come up with otherwise run into national firewall issues if they're too obscure or they're not done with the right account or blah, blah, blah. So that's my only thing is like, okay, so we need something. The IAB used to give us BOF champions, and I haven't felt like that's happened recently.
It does. There's generally an IMB member that's helping
Okay,
out.
I haven't felt that love that I have felt in the past. But what I'm trying to say is that maybe that needs to be more visible, and that maybe that's the way in which we can both formalize the preparation while not also calling it running into our 2 number. So give us let us have some tools in there. And so delete this, but somehow we have to have an understanding of what is a BOF and what is not a BOF, and what is just, effectively a hallware conversation, but we have time zone and travel issues.
Yeah, I think you're just describing the difference between a side meeting and a BOF, and both of those can be virtual.
The question is, can I use Meet Echo for a side meeting?
That is a great question, but I don't think we need to answer it.
We don't have to answer it here, but someone has to have an answer that we have consensus on.
All right.
You might be agreeing. Mirja.
So I agree then that we should keep the notion of that above is effectively a one-time event. This is like the kind of thing where you ask to create a working group, and yes, you may fail and get a second chance or whatever, but it should not be like a series of events until you have it in the right shape that it might be accepted or whatever. So that notion should stay in the document. But the hard limit never made sense to me, because you can always just come up with a new name, shape it slightly differently, and then is it the same BOF or not or whatever. So at the end, the ISG just needs to make a reasonable decision. And if the ISG says, I don't see this going anywhere, you should stop, then, that's an answer. And I don't think we need a hard limit for that, but yeah.
So what I'm hearing from the room is that we're going to remove the text that says that BOFs have to happen at plenary meetings, and that retains the 2 BOF limit, extend virtual or not. If we want to look at that limit, I think that should be done separately, because I'm not even sure we're chartered to answer that specific question at this time. Cool. Thank you, everyone, for the discussion. All right, a few more slides. I'll go quicker. 2418 talks about disruptive behavior a little bit. It really constrains what the chairs can do to handle disruptive behavior. As we've seen with no examples in particular, disruption has increased over time as the organization has grown. We've given chairs more tools, such as moderating their own mailing lists, which has helped. One thing, as part of our mandate to make this document match reality, I think it would make sense to say that it's still the chair's job to do this, but maybe constrain them less in this document. And then the question is, do we want to also refer to the work done by the Mod Pod working group that is talking about moderation in and of its side of working groups, but with additional tools such as a moderation team? Elliot, Mod Pod enthusiast.
Well, yes. This is Elliot, and the censor in chief, apparently, according to some. So I think it's probably good to refer to the Mod Pod document where we can, but I think the key thing is to make sure that 2418 retains the notion that the chairs really need to set the means and ways and means for the discussion and debate. And so if you can tease out those parts in a PR, that would be good. There's probably some stuff that really does need to be retained, though, in 2418 on this. Okay.
I absolutely agree with that. That would be my plan.
Roman Danilo, certainly recommend referencing ModPod, but if I look at the ModPod document, it's already making updates to the document itself. So to me, the question is, what is the residual text? I didn't fully kind of track, even with the PR, what's the residual text? Because if the ModPod document, which is now an AD review, actually makes it all the way through the process as kind of written, it would already be updating 2418 and pulling that text out, some of the text out.
That's a very good point. So I think what we need is for me to sit down and write a PR with that in mind, and then it'll help with everyone. Okay, thank you.
And again, a time check note, at 1:45, we're going to move to the next topic, Lars's document. So hopefully we can get through these last, and if we don't, we'll have to carry them over.
Totally understood. This is the penultimate slide. 2418 talks about a working group facilitator role. I've certainly never seen that role used in the past decade. Maybe folks in the room remember it being used. Is it a whatever, we just leave it in, who cares? Or is it a we just remove it to make things simpler because it's not useful? I'm getting an enthusiastic shrug from the room.
I don't know what this is, but what we do have is Mia Kulevin. Thank you. What we do have is a working group delegate. So this is just somebody we.
That's also in there. This is separate.
Okay, that is separate, and it's already in there. Okay, then remove it.
This Pete. Given what's going on in ModPod and the ability for moderators to step in different circumstances, I would prefer to leave this in, ignore the fact that we haven't used it in eons, if at all, because it at least gives us something to point to say, you can use this just the way you can use these other things. So my preference is, since it's not doing any damage, to leave it in, and it could interact with how ModPod outcomes work, leave it.
Makes sense to me. John?
Agree with Pete, and note that there's also some overlap between this and the document separate rule, which, if my memory serves me correctly, is not in 2418.
Okay, thanks, John.
Yeah, I actually disagree with Pete, but Elliot, sorry. I honestly, I apologize. Anyway, the reason that I come back to is from the participant perspective. The actual role of this facilitator is confusing. That you end up having to go to the chair. The chair is going to refer you to the facilitator. If you're new, it's, or if you're participating remotely, it's even harder to figure out the facilitator role. And ultimately, from a ModPod perspective, what we say is that the chairs are responsible, or the administrators are responsible all the time. So I don't want the ModPod document to be the tail wagging the dog on this one.
Okay, so it sounds like we need more discussion on this one. Let's take it to the list. Very briefly on a last open design issue, which is about design teams. It is a concept that is mentioned in 2418. We definitely use those regularly. Should we formalize them more, or should we just kind of leave it as is?
So David, this smells like new process to me, and therefore out of scope, or? I mean,
just
I
to
could
be clear,
wrong.
I'm not suggesting here, so I'm not the one who filed the issue. I think the reason it becomes interesting is that the output of a design team is already codified in the process, that it doesn't have any formal value until it is ingested into the working group. But 2418 was published before our IPR policies. And if the design team output goes into the working group and it's not clear who was on the design team, you could get some confusion about who made the contribution. It might be new work and it might be out of scope, but I think there's a small but real problem to be solved here. Barry?
Ms. Barry Lee, but why don't you just propose some change and we'll see what we think of it.
That sounds like a great idea. I could do that. All right. Thanks, everyone. That's it.
Thank you, David. And Lars?
Right. So this is the IETF chair delegation doc that was dispatched, I think, to PROCON, but isn't adopted. And it also almost hasn't changed since I first presented it. So it's 00 again, since I renamed it to PROCON. It was had IETF chair may delegate was the name before. This is a 1 or 2 slide overview, and then basically we're going to discuss it for the rest of the time. I have a clicker. Thank you. Right. So the motivation is I used to be chair. It feels like ages ago, which is good. The IETF chair has many responsibilities, all of which Roman fulfills better than I did. There's a nice little diagram about what the IETF chair is all tasked to do, right? So they have like 17 different things that we pile onto them. And generally, there's few of them where the draft or the RFCs that define the responsibilities say that, oh yeah, and the chair can also delegate it, or the IASG can choose to not send the chair. Unfortunately, those cases where the RFCs allow that, I would argue it's actually the ones that the chair really should be doing, but so many of the other ones can't be delegated, like, for example, this IAB membership, or chairing the ISG, or chairing the general area. It causes overloads. It limits also somewhat the ability of the chair to define the role / aggressively choose where they spend their time. And the chair is also a sort of single point of failure. There's no really defined way to temporarily design a stand-in beyond the midterm replacement vacancy thing, which is like somebody cannot fulfill the job anymore. The ISG has sort of worked around this by you ask somebody to like run the telechat for you if you're like sick or can't do it. But it's not really a defined thing. And so the draft basically is written to allow both of these things. So I think I have it on the next slide. Right. So it's separating the role of the IETF chair from a bunch of these roles that are implicitly overlaid onto it. Like, for example, that the IETF chair is also the ISG chair, or that the IETF chair is also an IB member, or that the IETF chair is also the GenID, and there were many others on the previous diagram that I didn't put there. And it also defines an emergency stand-in procedure that can be in effect until the midterm vacancy procedure, which takes some time to run, kicks in, and it's basically the IAB chair is the stucky. And if the IB chair is unable to do so, and I specifically don't say why they might be unable, it might simply be, hell no, I don't have time for this. It's the chair of the IETF LLC, who then has no recourse. But the LLC can always hire cycles. And as soon as the non-com appoints somebody, that new appointee is then the chair. So that is sort of the proposal. I wasn't in Madrid because the meeting got moved late in the game, and I had a flight planned that didn't happen because it got canceled, but I was at the airport trying to figure that out. So I couldn't virtually join either. I understand there was a discussion. Thanks, Yari, for sending me a bunch of editorial feedback. I think the main point that I remember reading about from Madrid was the question of whether, I think the current document says that the delegation of these various roles that the chair may choose to do needs to land with other ISG members. And I think that was a discussion point. And I sent an email about this that I should have probably sent earlier recently, which said that, so I thought about this, and the reason I chose it to be limited to ISG members was that NOMCOM has selected them for sitting on the body of the ISG, and they are therefore already partial to information that is shared amongst the ISG. Number one, right? So you can assume that there's some context already in an ideal scenario. And specifically on the point of why not IB members, it's because Kobe, that I don't remember, but I hear about it. And if John is still there, maybe we hear more about it. But basically, the community a long time ago has deliberately decided the IB should have nothing to do with the standards process. And if the chair can now delegate to IB members, that would sort of unroll this, which may be okay now. It's been a long time, but we should sort of then explicitly say, yeah, we're fine with that, and put that in there. So those are sort of my arguments for not changing any text in this 00 document. Right.
Yeah, and before we jump into the discussion, so we had a plan for what to do with this document, and the plan involves sort of separating the question of whether we're expanding to the bigger set of people that you can delegate to, and then the actual adoption of the document. So we're thinking that we will do an adoption call on the list, or if you have comments here, you can also comment on that topic here.
Can I ask one question? So the document sort of lumps in two things. One is the chair can delegate stuff, and then there is the emergency stand-in procedure. And there's no need that they need to be in one document, but both of them felt small enough that one document made sense. But the working group can decide to like tease them apart or only do one or only do the other. I think those are options too.
And yeah, those are options, and those are fine things to say on the adoption call, that no, I want this as separate items, or whatever the comment may be. And with regards to the bigger issue of who to delegate to, then that's a thing that is kind of like a working group topic that we need to get to some kind of consensus. And Leslie and I had asked the group to make specific proposals, and you had done, Lars, and Rich you had, and Brian Carpenter had added some things. Brian is not here. We could ask you, Rich, to state your thoughts on this, and then we open it up for discussion.
Yeah, name's Rich Sauls. I suggested, just because I saw nobody responded and helped to move things forward, I said, oh, make it IESG and IAB. And then Lars responded, well, this is why I picked just the IESG. So I actually withdraw my suggestion, because I understand context is really important. And if something happened that we need to replace, or the chair needs to delegate some duties, then you want somebody who can, as the phrase goes, hit the ground running. So I'm good with it.
Okay, open discussion. Miriam.
Yeah, for Mia Kulevin. First, one comment. You said ISG, but the charter says ADs. And the IAB chair
Yes,
is
sorry.
a member of the ISG.
Specifically ADs, yes.
Okay.
Sorry? No?
Well, listen to what you just asked.
Okay,
Yeah, the IAB chair is a member of the ISG.
correct.
So is that included or not?
So I think for the purposes of being delegated responsibilities to, is the IAB chair allowed? In my current understanding, I would not allow them.
Okay.
Because they're not selected by NOMCOM for that role, and maybe the text is wrong.
Okay.
So I would exclude them from being a delegate of chair roles,
Yeah.
but for the emergency stand-in, I think that's a different conversation.
Okay. I wanted to clarify that, and then my comment. I think actually we should not decouple this too much, because even the emergency stand-in, the IETF chair is a full-time role. So you cannot just like put this full-time role on somebody else who wasn't committed to give a full-time role. So what I would propose is to have a emergency fallback that splits these two roles that the IETF chair has. The ISG chair, the Gen AD, and like all the other stuff you do as IETF chair, splits them and make fallback to different positions. And there, the IAB chair could have a role, but everything that's related to the standards process, which is the ISG chair and the Gen AD, that should stay within the ISG or the other ADs.
Okay.
And I think this is true for both for emergency fallback and for delegation, actually.
Okay, I think we maybe you can like write down an email or something after the meeting with some thoughts of how that would look like. I don't think we can design it here, but yeah, I mean, there's other possibilities exist, right? The other thing why I thought that delegation to only ADs made sense is that this is sort of a far-fetched possibility, but I don't want an IETF chair to run saying, hi, I'm Lars, I work for Mozilla, I run as chair, and my delegee for the IAB is Martin Thompson, and my delegee for the LLC is Dennis Jackson, and sort of basically have campaigning as teams, either within an organization or across organizations, right? I said far-fetched, but that's why I want to limit it to people who are being put there by NOMCOM.
John.
I don't know how many people in the room remember back to when we were first discussing this set of arrangements transitioning from the all-powerful IAB to the present situation. But But I encouraged the working group to consider a radical alternative to this. The radical alternative is to say the problem which we've gotten into is a consequence of piling stuff onto the IETF chair that was never intended to be part of the pile, and has turned it, as someone commented, into a full-time job. And I would rather see us thinking about creating a general AD separate from the IETF chair. If that person is conceived of as deputy IETF chair, to whom some of these things can be shuffled around in an emergency, that's dandy. But if this job has become too big for one person, and the NOMCOM is selecting people according to the job description, and people are volunteering to the job according to the job description, and this job has become much too burdensome, which I think is probably true, that maybe we should be rethinking the job rather than playing games with the IETF chair, passing out responsibilities in various ways. And if there's any feeling that that's a reasonable idea, I'm happy to sit down and do some writing, but I'd rather not if this is going to get no traction at all.
Right. I moved over there because the audio up here is really poorly because the speakers go the other way. So I remember you saying that, and I think I agree. However, it is the ISG that gives the NOMCOM the job description, right? So it's actually the ISG who says, here is who we want on the ISG. And so the ISG can say, like, we would like NOMCOM to appoint a Gen AD. In theory, right? The ISG can say that, except there's old RFCs that say, oh, the IETF chair has that role. Right? And so the point of this document is to untangle this and make it possible for the ISG to say to NOMCOM, we would like you to select maybe an ISG chair, right? Which also currently doesn't work.
And what I'm suggesting is a different untangling, which is that we split the job.
So I'm just going to do a time check here. There's 4 minutes left in our allotted slot. I think that the key things that we want to get clarity on today are whether or not we've got traction enough to adopt this document towards our working group task. And then separately, there is a question of when or if we recharter, because as it stands, we couldn't take the IAB chair in as part of the outcome. So I think my proposal is the same one that Yari outlined, is we focus on, do we want to take this document as a working group item? And then as we go through it, we can determine whether or not we really need to consider the IEB chair or other extensions and see about rechartering then.
But Leslie, as long as that's fine, as long as taking this as a working group document doesn't foreclose the possibility of splitting the role into a separate position.
Yes.
David Skenazy, that feels a little backwards to me. I would strongly prefer that we recharter to allow the working group to decide.
Roman, can you offer an opinion on that? It's not that I disagree with you, David. It's just that Roman had opinions in July. I don't know if his opinions have changed as our AD.
I feel like this is going to take much longer than 2 minutes to kind of resolve. So just to restate what I think is on deck, is there a feeling there's a feeling we have a particular outcome that's written into the kind of the charter that presents a certain kind of courses of action relative to delegation. We have a document that we may or may not adopt. There's a desire for there potentially be the ability to delegate to a group broader than what's allowed kind of in the charter. So, do we update the charter to allow the maximum possible area of delegation and then do kind of adoption? Or do we recognize that we are chartered in a particular way, we're going to hammer on a particular document, and then if we decide that the outcome we need in that document isn't allowed in the charter, we would recharter at that time? I recommend go faster, which is like, let's adopt the document and figure it out because we can handle it concurrently. I mean, I guess what I would say is, if you're asking me at what point would I block to say like you're talking about something out of scope, is that probably would be at working group last call time.
Thanks.
To summarize my position in 30 seconds, I think I've seen the cudgel of no, this is not in charter waves so much that my personal take is if we want to adopt this now, I strongly object to adoption. If we want to recharter, I strongly support rechartering. Once we have rechartered, I strongly support adoption. That is, I care very strongly about this ordering.
And then Miriam.
Okay, then I feel like we're a little bit stuck and we're also out of time. But I think that if we were going to consider rechartering, it would be uniquely to consider adding IAB chair as the possible. Well, and this is why I do not wish to leave it to the working group, because we can talk about all the possibilities in the world and we'll come up with all the scenarios where, you know, delegating to my Aunt Martha would be the obvious outcome. By the way, I don't have an Aunt Martha. And yeah, and just having that conversation in the abstract seems wrong, which is why we proposed focusing on adopt the document, drive it as far as we can, make sure we identify, oh, this isn't adequate. We need something here.
I would ask it differently in the sense is so we can revise this in the future if it ends up being limiting in practice that you can't delegate to the IB chair, for example, right? If that is really a problem, we can fix that later. I don't see why this blocks it now, but that's just me.
And I just wanted to add one more thing. This is Jari on why we wanted to do it in this order rather than the other order. And the reason is that we don't have a proposal. Like we would have to have a discussion, like how do we want to extend this? And then we can draft a charter that matches that proposal and then adopt the charter and then or approve the charter and then adopt the document and do the work. So that was sort of a practical consideration that we don't know what to write to the charter at this point.
But I really disagree here because we need to have this discussion. We didn't have the discussion yet, and the charter doesn't allow us to have this discussion. If you as chairs want to say, I only want to have the discussion based on concrete text proposals, you can enforce that, but the charter shouldn't limit our discussion.
I guess I'll do an ED interject. We regularly in all sorts of working groups talk about work that's not in charter. And if folks want an assurance that I will not, to the degree that I'm the responsibility, say I will not pull the kind of the card that we're talking about out of charter things, I will not. That's always the discretion of the working group chairs.
Okay, I think it's time to say thank you and have a good lunch, but thank you to Pete for taking our notes. Thank you to everybody for a really productive and useful discussion. And yeah, see you online.
There's a 1-inch spot where you get a laser in your eye. It is super hard. You stand here, and it's literally this